finally the dawn of a new era. Terror of Mechagodzilla, as I said, was only for a moment that Godzilla movies would go away on a slight hiatus, which to me I think was very much needed. Given after 20 years of movies, consistent films, it needed a step away, and go back to the drawing board for a lengthy period of time. Godzilla needed that, especially in an era where public interest in giant kaiju movies was starting to wane. There was also the possibility that older fans who cherished the themes of the original just may feel neglected. Nothing wrong with the Showa era, obviously. It's brilliant, a blend of fun, campiness, cheese, with tons of personality built into the kaiju. But here we go with a new era and a chance to take it back to the basics, back to the beginning of what cemented Godzilla as something a little bit different than the rest. You see, as you all know, the original was a product of its environment and its time. The nuclear era that we wandered into was terrifying. As years went by, countries continued to stockpile more and more nuclear weapons. The Cold War, which started in the late 1940s, was only progressing, and tensions progressed between the USSR and the United States, creating an uneasy nuclear anxiety among the public that heightened to the closest call that we've ever known to date, known as the Cuban Missile Crisis. Historically speaking, from the 50s and on, the nightmare of nuclear warfare felt very real. You wouldn't talk about a movie that's a product of its time, and look no further than The Return of Godzilla. As a disclaimer, I do want to say I'm reviewing from the Kraken release. Now, if anybody is curious, this version I believe came out in 2014, and there also is a 1985 release, which was for the American audiences, which basically they removed certain scenes from the movie, and they went ahead and added in Raymond Burr again, just like on the original movie. It's been years since I've seen that cut, and I will say, that's been one that I have dreamed to chase down and actually own on DVD for a long time. But we're talking about another movie that's maybe been 25 years since I've actually seen that version. And boy, do memories come back when I go ahead and think about the days that I saw that version. It was only available at a local VHS store way back in the day called Heisei Rentals. Back in the late 90s, it was my only way to obtain it. Unfortunately, that rental store and video store no longer exist. But boy, when I had a chance to get it, I rented this movie and the movie Carnosaurus every chance I could. It was a movie unlike any other Godzilla movie I'd ever seen before. A better looking suit, higher budget, better effects. This was my entry to the Heisei era, but I'll admit it lacked something that I loved from the Showa era: fighting scenes. Yes, it was unfortunate and it kind of bothered me as a kid that we had no other monster in this movie. Well, technically, there is one other monster in this movie. However, though, it's just nothing that builds up towards Godzilla fighting another monster, which is something that's kind of key that we kind of grew to expect and love from every Godzilla movie. Since Godzilla Rides Again, here though, it is dropped though, just for this movie, but it might be for the better. Honest opinion. Creating a movie centered around just Godzilla for a change really does this movie lots of favors. If we went ahead and added in another monster, it might kind of distract us from the point of what we're trying to hammer home, especially when we're trying to establish Godzilla not as a hero, not even as an anti-hero, but the villain. Just a force of nature's fury and our heir of our way. That's where we're going with this movie, and I feel like it hammers forth the message the best that it can by turning the tables and just changing Godzilla from what we knew him as and what he became, and just going ahead and taking the entire plot of this movie serious, even if that means adding in more political tones and making Godzilla's imagery just looks much darker. To accomplish this, we need to take Godzilla back to the basics of what made the original special so we can retell this message in an environment living in fear, where we could potentially end up destroying ourselves. This movie, unlike King Kong 1976, offers something a little bit different. Now remember how I told you in that movie, it goes ahead and basically just wipes the slate clean and basically just re-images King Kong in the 1970s. This movie, on the other hand, while set in 1984, it disregards everything after the original Godzilla movie and just goes from there, only acknowledging the events of the original events of the movie, and of course, what made that movie, what caused Godzilla in the first place, in a new, modern era of potential nuclear war. The movie kicks off pretty quick and actually, well, kind of mirrors another movie. A ship is attacked and we've lost everybody on board except for one lone survivor who witnessed the destructive beast. Eventually, a reporter sets sail and investigates the ship, only to realize they've been attacked by a giant sea louse. Now listen, you would think that this giant sea louse is potentially just going to go ahead and be something big. It's going to grow out and mutate into a bigger monster, but that's not exactly the case, because really, it's just there to set up for Godzilla. Due to the fact that basically it's feeding off Godzilla, it lands on a ship and ends up attacking everybody on board except the one lone survivor, and of course the guy that shows up to investigate the scene. It would be cool if this was used for a bigger idea later in the movie, but that's not even the case though, so it's just one of those things that you're going to think about and kind of forget about as you go into this movie. But it does really give this movie some really eerie, creepy tones in this movie that already feel like something entirely different. I mean, some of it is a little bit on par with Godzilla vs. Hedorah. It's just pretty odd, the overall environment. It feels like a typical 80s sci-fi horror movie. So the culprit behind this attack is the new Godzilla. But in order to avoid hysteria of the new Godzilla's resurgence, Japan keeps the news quiet, all until Godzilla attacks a USSR submarine, which leads the Soviets to believe this is a blunt attack by the United States. But they don't claim no involvement with this attack at all. But that doesn't stop the Soviets from threatening to launch a nuclear missile, beginning nuclear war, and the tensions between the nuclear powerhouses begin to rise. Alright, so let's pause this movie and kind of think about the context of what we've got already from this movie. I mean, there's a lot going on. It already feels like danger's in the air right now. So not only do we have a Godzilla problem in the background working around and he hasn't even attacked Tokyo, but we potentially got nuclear war. World War III is potentially at the brink because Godzilla attacked a submarine and tensions are already high. This speaks volumes and paints the picture completely for what was going on at the time of this movie's release. I gotta say, going ahead and watching this movie and thinking about today's climate, things hit very different than the last time I saw this movie when I was a kid. I mean, obviously as a kid, the big thing that I looked forward to was when was Godzilla's appearance gonna be? But as an adult though, I really pay attention to the dialogue, and that is really important for this movie, and it really shows and helps this movie because it's aged significantly well. Regardless of what year it is, what's going on, it still feels uncanny. In order to evade all-out nuclear war, and speeding up the nuclear doomsday clock, Japan releases the news that they know who is responsible for the submarine attack. A new Godzilla has been released, and boy does this movie make sure to let you know that this isn't your old friendly Godzilla, nor is he trying to be the original Godzilla. It is something extremely original in its own way, but also paying tribute to where it all started. First thoughts revisiting this movie, I gotta say that I absolutely love how they introduced Godzilla, the point of view of him walking in, the stomping, the new sound effects, the new look of Godzilla that just looks more deadlier with these new crazy fangs in his mouth. There's a bunch of different things I gotta say when it comes to these practical effects that I absolutely love. Yes, there is some dated things. Yes, there are some wonky eyes. But overall though, this is magnificent. It's almost on par with the King Kong 1976. Granted, there's a few issues here and there. It's something though that really feels like great progress within the last 9 years that we saw Godzilla. This movie is something else, and Godzilla's presence creates uncertainty in the air for when he'll land in the city and terrorize the lives of several innocents. This movie's political presence is also far-felt, with our war room scene with countries showing their support to launch a nuclear attack on Godzilla, with the exception of one major country who is highly against using nuclear weapons, again, because they know what it's like and they know the dangers inherently up front. Yes, the one country that felt the wrath of the nuclear force ending World War II, and the fallout of many nuclear tests. They're not willing to risk it. Upon Godzilla's arrival, it leaves me in awe just seeing Godzilla wander around in the then modern Tokyo, Japan. It's something to behold. We have our new weapon, the Super X, which launches cadmium shells into Godzilla's mouth to knock him out, due to the fact that Godzilla's heart is basically like a nuclear reactor. So, finally we have some good news, only to find out the news gets worse, because a Soviet ship has accidentally launched a nuclear missile and is heading right for Tokyo, Japan. Then America strikes it, and then after that we get my favorite scene in this movie. Alright, I don't know if this is my favorite scene actually, to be honest, in this movie, but I gotta say the eerie red sky of the explosion and the music that's added on, it's so damn beautiful. Calming, mysterious, and gloomy at points. This movie doesn't feature a single classic piece of Godzilla themes, but I absolutely applaud it for what it has in this movie. It sets the tone for the movie going forward, and actually I gotta say, this is up there in my top 10 Godzilla soundtracks. To put this movie to bed, Godzilla reawakens and continues his rampage of the city, all until he's lured to a volcano where they plan to trap and destroy him with a newly created device. In the end, this creates the most memorable scene in this movie, and I kid you not, this is drilled in my head. It remains severely memorable for so many years, and I gotta say this is one thing that the 85 cut does better. So let's go ahead and take a listen. This scene tears apart my heart because it remains the only time we've heard Godzilla shriek in fear for his life. A sheer reminder, Yes, Godzilla is a violent monster, but at the same time he's a byproduct of our ways and what we've done. He didn't ask to exist. He's a creature doing what every living organism does, survive. He's our creation, our dangerous action of our consequences, and his life must end because of our error. So the Shriek, unfortunately, is not in the 84 cut of the Kraken release, which to me is kind of bummer. If I could go ahead and make a super cut between the 85 and the 84 release, I would absolutely do that, due to the fact that I absolutely love Raymond Burr's speech, and I absolutely love the Shriek, because it adds some extra emotion to Godzilla's death in this movie, or at least what we thought was his death in this movie for the time being. I gotta say, I applaud Raymond Burr, because apparently from what I understand, he was willing to do this movie and take part in the movie only if the message continued to be serious and straightforward about Godzilla and the anti-nuclear message that the movie presented. That's the only way he wanted it presented to the table. He wrote a beautiful message at the end of this movie and gave the speech and executed it extremely well. And that's one thing I gotta say the 85 version does a little bit better, even though there are scenes that are very key in certain contexts that is missing, which does technically in a way make that version inferior to the 84 cut. Due to the length of the speech and copyright reasons, I can't go ahead and put it in this video, but I will go ahead and link you to another YouTube video that does have it, so I advise you to go ahead and check that out if for some reason you have not heard or read the speech that he gave. Before I sign off, I want to go and say this. I do believe The Return of Godzilla is a brilliant product of its time. I'm not turning this into a movie face-off between the 54 and 84 release, but both movies historically point out the anxiety of people's lives. Once again, verifying the art that I've grown to love about these movies, time and time and time again, even as I grow old. Glenn Destruction, signing off. Join me next week.